Okay, wonderful. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am here with Chris Powell, who is the Secretary and Treasurer of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. Chris, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks very much for your interest, Josh.
Oh, not a problem. As I mentioned before we started, I came across your organization watching a documentary about the end of the fiat banking system, and so I was fascinated to get involved and get in touch. So why don't we start by getting you to give people an idea or a good explanation of who GATA is, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee.
We're a nonprofit educational and civil rights organization. We're based in the United States. We're recognized by the U.S. Internal Revenue Service as a tax-exempt 501c3 organization, so that we can accept contributions really on a tax-exempt basis. We have been trying for 2 decades now to research, document, expose, protest, sometimes litigate against the manipulation of the gold market by governments, other central banks, and their agents. We have, sued the Federal Reserve a couple of times. We won one case in a technical way. It was a Freedom of Information case. We had another case, our first case, we did not win, but the case elicited an admission from the U.S. government that it claimed the power to do exactly what we were complaining about, that is rigging the gold market. So we know from the first court case that the U.S. government does claim the power to do everything we accused it of without necessarily admitting that they were doing it. We run a bit of a news service. We send dispatches to our about 8,000 subscribers almost every day, things that might be of interest to investors in the gold and silver markets and people who are interested in the currency markets generally. We try to speak at financial conferences, though we don't get too many invitations anymore. And we're a resource for people who just want to know how the gold market is managed by government.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of things I'd like to go through actually from that. That's a great overview of all the work you do. So I guess we should just start at the beginning, really, with the allegations of manipulation of the gold market. So, how do you propose that they are manipulating the gold market, and why would they benefit from doing this?
Well, actually, the U.S. government has been manipulating the gold market at least since the 1960s. It originally did it in the open through what was called the London Gold Pool, which was an association of the U.S. government and I guess about 7 U.S. allies in Europe, by which they disordered from their gold reserves regularly to hold the official gold price at $35 an ounce. That collapsed in March 1968 because there was too much offtake in the London gold market. Investors began to realize the gold price was much lower than it should be, that inflation was raging, and gold was worth more than the official price. The offtake destroyed the London gold market, and the central banks, Western central banks, regrouped over the next few years, and they came up with another mechanism for rigging the gold market, and that was the futures market. And so the Western central banks, particularly the U.S. central bank, the Federal Reserve, they have been selling futures really almost on a daily basis. They've been swapping gold with each other and with bullion banks to put out fires in gold market demand in certain markets. All this is documented. The difference is in the 1960s, the gold price suppression policy of the Western central banks was open and public. Now it's largely surreptitious, and it's done behind the scenes and through intermediary brokers.
Okay, so then how is it done now behind the scenes by these intermediary brokers? Like, what are they doing? Are they just dumping amounts of gold in order to push the price down?
Most most typically, they're selling futures, selling gold futures. We believe they're also selling silver futures, but we really haven't documented that part of it as well. They exchange gold with each other through transactions they call swaps, so that gold can be applied closest to the market that needs manipulating. Um, this is documented. Some of our better documents we have on our internet site the March 1999 secret staff report of the International Monetary Fund, where the IMF staff acknowledges that central banks dissemble about their gold reserves. They do not distinguish between gold in the vault and gold that is encumbered through swaps and shorting and things like that. Central banks conceal this gold data, the secret IMF staff report says, because they don't want their intervention in the gold markets to be noticed, and they don't want the markets to know what the true gold position of central bank reserves is. We follow very closely through our consultant, Robert Lamborn, the really daily interventions in the gold market by the Bank for International Settlements, which is the gold broker for major central banks. Bob goes through the monthly statement of accounts of the BIS to calculate its gold position and its gold swap position, and that position changes sometimes substantially every month, which is an indicator of this intervention in the gold market by central banks. The BIS is an association of central banks, and it doesn't do anything any of its central bank members don't want it to do. So there's constant intervention. If you look closely at the documents, you can see this, and it's very very current. I think the BIS monthly statement of accounts is probably the most revealing at the moment. But there's many other documents. There's admissions from various central bankers in their memoirs. There's speeches central bankers have given in the last 10 or 15 years or so, in which they acknowledge that they're intervening in the gold market, and they're doing it because gold is a currency that competes with government currencies, and central banks don't want anybody competing with their currencies.
Okay, right. That kind of, yeah, that sort of half answers the next question I had about this. So it's the reason that they would decide to intervene in the gold markets and try to suppress the price is because gold is a competitor currency almost to the dollar, because since
Yes,
they've become decoupled.
It's actually much more than that. There's a fair amount of academic literature on the point. Gold, in addition to competing with government currencies, if the gold price is up, the government currency's value is down, and vice versa. But in addition to that basic competition, the academic literature will show that gold is a determinant not only of currency values in the foreign exchange market. Gold is also a determinant of interest rates and government bond prices. It's also really a determinant of the price level generally in the economy. It's the ultimate escape from the world financial system. If you don't like what a government is doing, or governments generally are doing, if you don't like their inflation or deflation, if you don't like their capital controls, gold is a full competitor of all assets. There's a quote from Paul Volcker saying that this competition that gold poses for investment, not just competition to currencies, but and bonds, but competition to stocks and commodities and other asset prices. This makes gold, Volcker said, of very powerful interest to central banks, and it is a determinant. Really, the gold price is a determinant of all other values in the financial world.
Hmm. So you're saying rather than the US dollar being like the reserve currency of the world, that the benchmark by everything is measured, that in reality, gold is the universal thing by which value is measured.
Well, it is, I think, the ultimate measure. Right now the dollar is considered the world reserve currency, but gold was the world reserve currency. The U.S. got the major nations of the world together in the International Monetary Fund, and one of their rules is to forbid their member states from linking their currencies to gold. Now, why is that? That's a proclamation that governments want to push gold out of the world financial system. In fact, if you read some of the minutes that are on the internet site of the historian of the U.S. State Department, you read some of the minutes of the IMF proceedings, you find that pushing gold out of the financial system is a primary objective of central banking. Central banking doesn't want competition with its rigging of the economy. It doesn't want competition with its setting currency values and foreign exchange values. So Western central banks long have done their best to push gold out of the financial system, because if gold is ever generally re-recognized as a superior reserve currency, then the government monopoly on the financial markets and currencies and financial valuations, that all falls apart.
Hmm. So I've just been trying to find this thing where you said the US got all the members of the IMF. Did you say to agree to
Yeah.
not back their currency with gold? So they're actually forbidden from doing it.
Yes, it's a protocol of the International Monetary Fund. You cannot, if you're a member of the IMF, you are forbidden from linking your currency to gold at any fixed value. A central bank can have gold, but it can't formally make any any price level exchange between its currency and gold. They don't want gold recognized as an international currency. That's the rule.
Okay. And when was this? Was this?
Oh, I believe that protocol was adopted in 1974. I think it was part of the so-called Jamaica Accords, but I'm not perfectly sure of that. There's a similar document on the internet site of the historian of the U.S. State Department. Is the transcript of a conversation in the office of Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. He's talking with his Deputy Assistant Secretary Thomas O. Enders about how the United States has got to persuade its European allies not to involve gold more in the world financial system, because that will impair the dollar's role as the world reserve currency. Enders tells Kissinger in that transcript that at that point in time, the European states collectively had amassed more gold in their reserves than the United States had, and that whoever has the most gold can reprice it from time to time, and in repricing the gold, reprice all the currency values in the world. Enders tells Kissinger that we can't allow this because that will impair the status of the dollar as the world reserve currency. And Kissinger agrees. It's a very revealing conversation. It's in transcript form. It's on the internet site of the State Department historian, and it's at GATA's internet site, and our very long summary of the documentation of gold price suppression. Anybody who wants to see that and can't find it can just email me at cpowell@gata.org, and I'll send them the link. But if you're looking for that document and other documents of suppression, I would just encourage people to go to GATA.org and then look in the left column. You'll see a page labeled The Basics. Open that page up, and right now the top item on that page inside is a very long summary of the history of gold price suppression, the mechanisms, the causes for it, its objectives, and really, I think, very conclusive documentation about it.
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up on screen here for people so they can find it, and I'll put the link in the description as well. So that's great, actually. I will definitely be going very deep into that later. So just to clarify, so I've understood, because I think it was in 1944 with Bretton Woods when the price of gold was like fixed to the dollar at $35 an ounce, I think. So then what you're saying is then this was the moment where they said, no, all your currency shouldn't be backed by gold, and they sort of like decoupled it entirely.
That was the beginning of it. Yes, it
Okay.
was that international conference that really all the currencies, the major currencies, would be linked to the U.S. dollar at that time, and the U.S. dollar would be linked to gold at $35 an ounce, and that lasted until 1968 when the gold offtake in London through the gold pool just became overwhelming. The U.S. gold reserve ran down from something like 23,000 tons to, I think, below 10,000 tons. And the United States was flying emergency Air Force cargo planes over to the Bank of England to repay the gold that the Bank of England was advancing into the gold market for price suppression on behalf of the United States. And the gold reserves ran down so dramatically in early 1968 through the London gold pool that the United States had to ask the British government to shut it down. And that's what happened.
But then you mentioned then that during this period, that European nations, I guess post-war, had then started to buy up like large amounts, or central banks had started to buy up large amounts of gold, and they would be able to reprice the gold. Or whoever has the most gold is able to like reprice it.
Yeah.
Is that
actually it happened after the collapse of the gold pool? I mean, the European nations had a certain amount of gold reserves, and they were disorting them regularly through the gold pool. But gold pool collapsed in March 1968, and from that point on, 68 to 74, central banks in Europe were holding on to their gold, perhaps acquiring a little more. And in 1974, the State Department discovered, hey, wait, look, the Europeans have more gold than we do now. And that means if they, try to remonetize it in various ways, they will be able to reprice all the currencies along with their repricing of gold. And we can't allow that because that will undermine the dollar.
okay? What do you mean by remonetize? Sorry.
If they did anything to raise the gold price. So, for example, there's correspondence between the German Bundesbank and the U.S. authorities around this time, in which the United States induces the Bundesbank to promise that it will not purchase gold at anything above the official price. So the United States was involved in various ways in discouraging the European countries from adding to their gold reserves or using their gold as a matter of currency valuation.
Okay.
This is all extensively documented. It's a matter of history. And, I always am so appalled when people refer to gold price suppression as conspiracy theory. It's decades of public policy that's on the public record. And if you look in the right place, you can find it. Now, I don't know of any place where it is more comprehensively compiled than it is at GATA's internet site. But this is the historical record. The Federal Open Market Committee has monthly meetings. Do they invite you? Do they invite me? Do they let anybody in to those meetings? Of course not. The Bank for International Settlements has monthly meetings at its headquarters in Basel in Switzerland. All the major countries are represented at that meeting. Do they let the public in? No, they don't. If you ask questions of the BIS, as I have done, they'll very politely reply to you, say, no, we don't answer questions, but you might try your central bank. Well, of course, the central banks don't answer questions either, at least not, on topics that are as sensitive as gold. But, government is, Josh, by definition, whenever government operates in secret, it is by definition a conspiracy. A conspiracy is a cabal that gets together to discuss and formulate and implement policy outside of public view. Government is a conspiracy. Government is not a theory. Government is a reality. Well, gold price suppression is not conspiracy theory. It's long-time historical fact that's extensively documented, even in some government archives that are public.
So, like, what do you think then it is that makes people uneasy to suggest that this is actually happening? Like, what is this barrier that means that not many people have ever heard of this? Like, even I don't know, I don't want to say even me, but like I've been watching and talking about a lot of financial corruption and manipulation of markets and just like bad financial practice, fraud, things like that over the past 18 months on this show, and no one has ever mentioned gold price suppression to me. It has never come up in anything I've read until recently. So, like, what do you think it is? Is it that people don't see the connection between that and the rest of the economy? They just think, oh, it's just one random little single commodity, or?
I think most people who are seriously involved in the gold sector, they know this, but they're too afraid to talk about it. Why? Well, because you've got all the government power in the world is against having anybody know about it. If the secrecy around gold price suppression policy was dispersed and it was done in the open, gold price suppression policy would fail. Gold price suppression policy requires secrecy to work. If markets know that they're rigged, nobody's going to play in those markets anymore. They're going to go somewhere else. Rigged markets are rigged in order to deceive investors. If investors are no longer deceived, they're not going to be investors there anymore. They'll go somewhere where they're not cheated. But the big reason here, Josh, is look, central banks create money in infinite amounts. GATA may receive a few $100s in public contributions every couple of weeks or so. Now, who are you going to be scared of? You're going to be scared of GATA, or you're going to be scared of governments and central banks. And it's not just the governments and central banks. It's also the big international banks, what are called the bullion banks, which are market makers in the monetary metals. They are also, for the most part, formerly agents of the U.S. government. They're primary dealers in U.S. government securities. They have very intimate relations with the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department. You have this immense financial power being applied on suppressing any information about its rigging of the market. That's why you seldom hear about it. It's because the huge amounts of money that are on the other side telling people don't get into this. It'll be bad for your health. The mainstream financial news organizations, with very few exceptions, won't touch this for that reason. I mean, our chairman, Bill Murphy, has always been very resentful, as I have been, but he's been more vehement about it, of the mainstream financial news organizations not getting into this issue. And I keep pointing out to him, Bill, you pick up the Wall Street Journal. Page 3, you've got a big ad from J.P. Morgan Chase. Page 5, you've got a ad from HSBC. Page 7, you got a big ad from Morgan Stanley. And you want to know why GATA's not on the cover of the B section? Well, I mean, all the money in the world, Josh, is applied in ways to keep this issue out of the public prints.
Yeah, you're very true. It's very accurate. I mean, the only, like, literally the only website that I have found that's consistently reporting on financial, like actually reporting on what's going on in the financial world in terms of like corruption, lawsuits, like all absolutely like top quality journalism, not some random person in a basement, is Wall Street on Parade from Pam and Russ Martins. They're just brilliant. I have no idea how they have the tenacity to continue pumping that out every day, but
well, if you spend any time at your site, you'll see that they don't have any advertising. Now, why is that? I don't think anybody in the financial world who is trying to make a living would want to be associated with their investigative journalism. Now, sometimes the corruption of the financial markets can't be ignored by mainstream news organizations. A year ago, J.P. Morgan Chase, which is a major bullion bank, which is the custodian for the Gold Exchange Traded Fund, SLV, was fined $920 million by the U.S. government for rigging the gold and silver markets. Now, that's on the record. that rigging did not nominally have anything to do with the government's use of J.P. Morgan Chase to rig the markets, but nevertheless, it was fantastic documentation that there's a lot of things going wrong in the gold and silver markets. A few weeks ago, a couple more J.P. Morgan traders were criminally convicted of rigging the gold and silver markets. Now, again, that didn't have any direct relation to government intervention, but I can refer people to documents of many documents of government intervention. For example, the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission is supposed to regulate the commodity futures market here in the United States. Some time ago, I put a question to the CFTC. Does the CFTC have jurisdiction over manipulative trading in the futures market that is undertaken by or at the behest of the U.S. government? The CFTC will not answer that question. Even a member of Congress, Alex Mooney from West Virginia, put that question to the CFTC in a formal letter. The CFTC will not respond to him. Now, if the CFTC will not answer whether it has jurisdiction over market rigging conducted by or for the U.S. government, I think you can be pretty sure that there is market rigging going on by the U.S. government, and the CFTC can't do anything about it because, as a matter of fact, under the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, it's perfectly legal. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 authorizes the U.S. government to trade secretly in gold and silver, and indeed, as amended in the 1970s, the Gold Reserve Act now authorizes the Treasury Department to trade secretly in any market in the world. That is, the U.S. law authorizes the U.S. Treasury Department's Exchange Stabilization Fund to go running around the world, rigging any market it wants in the name of stabilizing the value of the U.S. dollar. This is, you look up the Treasury Department's Exchange Stabilization Fund internet site. This is all on the record. They thought this out, Josh, long before GATA came along, and it's all legal. And that's what we got told by our lawyers when we first decided to try to sue about this market rigging. The lawyers looked it up and they said, well, don't look now, but the Gold Reserve Act authorizes the Treasury Department through its Exchange Stabilization Fund to intervene in any market and rig any price it wants to. The refusal of the CFTC to answer the question whether it has jurisdiction over market rigging conducted by the U.S. government, that's proof enough for me.
Yeah, here it is. The ESF can be used to purchase or sell foreign currencies, to hold U.S. foreign exchange and special drawing right assets, and to provide financing to foreign governments. All operations require explicit authorization of the Secretary of the Treasury.
Answering only to the president. You can't find out what they're doing.
Wow. I mean, obviously, they're not stating quite openly on the front page of their website that they are only reporting to the president, but I believe
but that's what the law says.
Yeah.
The Treasury Secretary and the President alone are responsible for the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Look, the Federal Reserve in New York, the New York Fed has a huge trading room. Do you think you can go in there, tomorrow and find out, what trades are you conducting? The New York Fed also has a second trading room adjacent to the Chicago Board of Trade and the CME Group in Chicago, which runs all the futures markets in the United States. The CME Group, which operates the futures markets in the United States, has something it calls its Central Bank Incentive Program. And you can see references to this on the CFTC internet sites filings from the CME Group. You can see it in the CME Group's filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You can see it on the CME Group's own internet site. CME Group has something called its Central Bank Incentive Program, which is to provide volume trading discounts to governments and central banks for their secret trading of all futures contracts in the United States, as long as those governments and central banks using the program are using a broker who's approved by the exchange. This is all public record. Now, I will guarantee you there has been no mainstream financial news reporting about the central bank incentive program, about central bank secret trading on all futures markets in the United States. I can't get them to pick up anything about this. It's probably the most sensitive secret in the financial markets, that the architecture for secret rigging of all the markets in the world is fully in place. It's fully legal. It's on the record. You can find it if you want to, but if you're going to work for a mainstream financial news organization, you're not going to be permitted to find it.
So hang on, you've just killed my career prospects at the Financial Times, man. Like,
well, if I were you, I would not use this interview in an application to the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times or New York Times or Bloomberg or anything like that.
Yeah, might cost me the job. But what you're telling me here is absolutely insane. You're saying that there's the legal and totally legitimized framework in place for the US, for the Federal Reserve to trade, and the Treasury Department to trade secretly, either using their own funds or through other brokers and other funds if they're approved, in order to rig any market in the world backed by infinite liquidity.
That's correct.
That's
exactly right.
Wow. And wow.
Well, but it's so simple to ascertain. Go to the New York Fed. I've been there. I didn't get inside, but say, I'd like to observe your trading room tomorrow. Is that okay? I'd like to observe your trading room in Chicago. I'd like to know how you're trading today. They won't let you in. Go to Basel, Switzerland, and ask to attend the next board meeting of the BIS. See if they let you, go in there. The BIS will acknowledge on its internet site that it does gold trading for central banks. We have the PowerPoint presentation that the BIS gave to prospective central bank members at a presentation, a recruitment presentation in Basel, 10 or so years ago. Where in the PowerPoint presentation, the services offered to potential central bank members by the BIS include interventions in the gold and currency markets. The BIS advertises that it provides interventions in the gold market for its central bank members. That PowerPoint presentation is on our internet site. Nobody's ever told us that it's a forgery.
Wow.
Nobody's ever told us that the secret staff report of the IMF from March 9, 1999, saying that the IMF has got to allow central banks to conceal the true status of their gold reserves, because revealing the true status would reveal their interventions. Nobody's ever told us that that's a forgery, but we have it, and it's on our internet site. That's why, nobody asks, because if you start asking these questions, you realize that there are no real markets in the world anymore. There's just a matter of interventions from the United States government.
Wow. I mean, this is just absolutely stunning. So, to what extent do the people who say the secretary of the Federal Reserve, or the head of the Federal Reserve, is Janet Yellen, still Janet Yellen? Or no, it's Jerome Treasury Secretary. Sorry, and then Jerome Powell is the head of the Fed.
Chairman of the Fed.
Yeah, to what extent are they the ones driving this? Whatever interventions are happening, say, is it all going through Jerome Powell? Is it coming from Janet Yellen? Is it coming from, I don't know, the other large financial players?
Well, it's a government policy, and look, this is, in fairness to Yellen and Powell, this policy long preceded them. This has been U.S. government policy for 50 years, and that's why Henry Kissinger's talking about it in that transcript of his conversation with Thomas O. Enders in 1974. That's what the London Gold Pool was about. It was London Gold Pool was undertaken at the behest of the United States to hold the gold price at $34 an ounce, because the gold price was the determinant of the value of the dollar, even back then. This is longstanding U.S. government policy, which has been assisted by the U.S. allies in Europe, particularly the United Kingdom, which houses the main gold market in the world over there. So it's a policy interest of the United States, and it would be the policy interest of the U.S. government, no matter who was Treasury Secretary and no matter who was Chairman of the Federal Reserve, at least until the U.S. government decides that it does not want to be an imperial power anymore. It does not want to rule the world through the currency markets. It wants to have free and transparent markets and spread democracy that way. One of the documents that we have on our internet site, Josh, is a Defense Department. Actually, it's a War Department intelligence newsletter from, I think it was 1942, 1943. The War Department, which we now call the Defense Department, kind of euphemize it a little bit, had a monthly intelligence letter during World War II called Tactical and Technical Trends. Excuse me. One of those editions, I think it was in 42, 43. It's on our internet site. I can find it for you. Anybody can find it in the basic summary I've already referred to. But that edition of Technical and Tactical Trends described in detail the rigging of the currency markets in occupied Europe by the Nazi German regime. And if you read that, there's other books called, there's a title that came out a few years ago, Hitler's Beneficiaries. There's academic literature about this, but we have the impression that the Nazi occupation of Europe looted Europe by, sending the SS into the Louvre and the other museums and taking the paintings off the wall and shipping them off to Hermann Goering's country house in Prussia. That happened. But the primary mechanism of the looting of occupied Europe in World War II, as the War Department newsletter details, and as some other history books will show, the primary looting of Europe during World War II was done by the Nazis by gaining control of the currency markets. The Nazis simply changed currency values. They changed exchange rates. When the Nazis got hold of France and the Bank de France, they changed the exchange rate of the franc to the Reichsmark from something like 1 franc was worth 2 Reichsmarks. They changed it to something like 1 Reichsmark was suddenly worth 40 francs. In Eastern Europe, where there was no developed central banking system, the Nazis issued special occupation currency for the local people to use, but this occupation currency was not convertible into anything in Germany itself. So when the Nazis got control of occupied Europe, they set up the currency system so that all production flowed out of occupied Europe into Nazi Germany, and nothing flowed back. There was starvation and privation throughout Europe, but not because the SS was doing it at the point of bayonets, it's because the monetary system was doing it. If you used any form of money at all in occupied Europe, you became an agent of the occupation.
Wow, I'd never heard anyone speak about this. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Like if you're going to go looting the whole, did they steal the gold from the central banks?
Yes,
as well?
Of course.
Yeah.
They stole the gold wherever they could steal it. Though some countries have been able to get their gold out to Canada or the United States before the Nazi troops came in. But the plundering of Europe, occupied Europe during World War II, was done primarily through the rigging of the currency markets, not by sending soldiers to steal everything. And that's the wonderful feature about currency market rigging. If you can rig the currency markets, you can exploit any country in the world, and no one will be able to figure out how you're doing it.
Yeah, that's the disturbing part about what we're watching. Well, about what we're watching happen with the financial system today, because it makes it seem a lot more insidious when you're saying that it's comparable to the way that occupied Europe had their financial resources drained and how they were like pillaged by by the financial system more than they were. Well, obviously not more, but like alongside the actual physical blowing up of and murder and all the
it's a
awful stuff.
tyrannical and imperialist system, whether the Nazis do it or whether the United States doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, the United States is not putting people in concentration camps. We don't have the mass murder camps that the Nazis had, but we are waging stupid imperial wars from time to time, and lots of people die in those.
Yeah. Never the people waging them, unfortunately. It's Anyway, so I wanted to go back. Actually, something you mentioned at the start was where your successful Freedom of Information Act request and the lawsuit against the Federal Reserve. Do you want to tell people a little bit about how that came about and why you decided to or what exactly it was you were asking for and what you found out from it?
After we realized that the architecture for market rigging was firmly entrenched in law, and that we were not going to stop the market rigging through any litigation because it was all legal, we figured, well, all we could do was try to expose it as best we could, because if the rigging is exposed, it will fail. It requires secrecy and deception to work. So we set about to expose it. We filed a request with the Federal Reserve to see all its gold-related documents in pursuit of the Freedom of Information Act here in the United States. We got a very interesting and illuminating response from the Fed. A member of the Fed's Board of Governors at that time, Kevin M. Warsh, wrote our lawyer a letter explaining the Fed's denial of our request to see the Fed's gold documents. And he mentioned, I think quite gratuitously, and I've always wondered if he was trying secretly to help us, but he mentioned quite gratuitously that among the documents the Fed was withholding from us were gold swap arrangements that the Fed had with other central banks. He specifically identified documents about gold swaps with other central banks as being among the documents the Fed wasn't going to give us. Well, simply disclosing to us that the Fed had gold swap arrangements with other central banks, we thought was incredibly important. So we got that out of the lawsuit. When the Fed denied everything to us, except some trivial stuff that was just on the internet, we took it to court in Washington, D.C., the district court there. And the judge ruled that the Fed was fully entitled to withhold from us all its gold documents except one. And that one that the Fed had to disclose, according to the judge, was the minutes of the G10 Gold and Foreign Exchange Committee. I don't know what year it was. I'd have to go look that up. But there was one document that the court found had to be disclosed to us, and it was the minutes of the Gold and Foreign Exchange Committee of the G10 powers, which when we finally got the minutes, it showed that the central bankers, again, had gathered secretly to discuss coordinating their policies in the gold market. Now, since the judge found that the Fed had illegally refused to give us that document, technically, we won the case, even though we got very little of what we had asked for. We got only one document. But because we did win that ruling that the Fed had illegally withheld that document from us, the judge entered judgment for us and ordered the Fed to pay court costs. So we display proudly on our internet site a check from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Virginia, in the amount of something like $2,400, which is what the Fed had to pay us because we fought the Fed and we won in this tiny little respect. They say, don't fight the Fed. Well, we fought the Fed and, we got one document and we got a Fed check for $2,400 to show that we'd won the case. And that's on our internet site if anybody wants to look that up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's more than many people can probably say. So congratulations.
Well, Bloomberg beat the Fed a few years ago trying to get a list of the recipients of the Fed's emergency loans during the
Mm.
2008 financial emergency, and that was a great victory too. And I have to give Bloomberg credit for that. But for the most part, major news organizations, mainstream organizations, won't touch this. A few years ago, after a year and a half of effort, we induced the Wall Street Journal to take up the gold issue, I gave the Wall Street Journal reporter a list of some of our expert consultants who would talk to her about this intervention in the gold market by the Federal Reserve. She talked to them, and lo and behold, one day, a story appeared on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, raising the question: is the Fed intervening in the gold market? Does the U.S. government really have any gold? But the story never mentioned GATA, though all the information that it contained was supplied by us. The people who were quoted were supplied by us. The remarkable thing about that Wall Street Journal story was that after quoting our consultants charging that the Fed was meddling in the gold market, the Wall Street Journal decided to violate the first rule of journalism, which is, if you accuse somebody of something, or if you quote anybody accusing somebody of something, you go to that person and ask them to respond. Well, you can read that Wall Street Journal story on our internet site. And after quoting our people saying the Fed's meddling in the gold market, the Wall Street Journal never called the Fed up and asked for comment. Now,
What?
I can't believe.
Are you kidding me?
You can read this. Look, if all this stuff sounds so fantastic to you, I'm sure it would sound even more fantastic to people at the Financial Times. So I've met with several of them several times. It's documented. You can read it on our internet site, and if you don't believe it, you can track it down with the originating agency and ask, "Hey, is this a forgery?" But the Wall Street Journal story is not a forgery. You can read it. This topic is so sensitive that it caused the Wall Street Journal to violate the first rule of journalism. It let some of our people accuse the Fed of market rigging, but it never sought, or at least it never published any indication that it had asked the Fed for comment on this, if it asked the Fed to rebut anything our guys were saying. Now, I suspect that the Wall Street Journal reporter did ask the Fed for comment and was told, "Are you kidding, lady? There's no way in hell we're going to talk about this. And if you want to get invited to our Christmas party this year, you better not mention us." And, that's what happens. Look, what was it, 10, 15 years ago, we put a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal thinking that maybe we could get some publicity if we bought some advertising. We spent more than $260,000, I think $262,000 for a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal laying out the gold market manipulation issue. And it was my idea, and I wish we'd never done it because it produced absolutely nothing. And we didn't even get invited to the Wall Street Journal's Christmas party for spending $262,000 with them. This topic, Josh, it's radioactive, okay? That's why, you can look at these documents and just be amazed. How can this be true? And none of it gets into the mainstream, financial press. Well, none of it gets into the press because it is true.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely going to. Well, you will get one citation from me in my next book where I will 100% be mentioning this. Because my next book is.
Look, I just would ask people, just read the summary of the evidence and the policy in the basic section of our internet site, and go through the documents one by one and ask yourself, is this a forgery? Is this genuine? A lot of this stuff is linked right back to government internet sites. If you don't believe something, go question somebody about it. Finally, I had to tell that Wall Street Journal reporter, stop calling me. I'm not the the expert. I'm a layman. I am not the original source of this information. Don't bug me. Stop it. I'm getting tired of you. Why don't you call the Fed, call the Treasury, call members of Congress, call bullion banks, ask them if this is true. But they're too scared to do that.
Did they openly say to you that they were too scared to do that, or
No,
that they wouldn't? Or they,
no. But after like about a half dozen calls over a year and a half from the Wall Street Journal reporter, I was very annoyed with her. I mean, I told her, why you keep asking me stuff? I'm not the authority. Ask the government people. And then you read her story, and she never talks to any government person, at least not in the story. I suspect the Wall Street Journal editors maybe had some conversations with the people of the New York Fed about this and decided that, well, we can go this far and no farther. We can't incriminate the Fed by saying they refuse to comment.
Yeah. And don't mention GATA was probably in there somewhere. You wouldn't want people being pointed towards a website that explained things for people, would you? So one of the questions actually that sort of sprung into my mind a little earlier when we were talking about this and the decoupling of gold from all of the major currencies, the beneficiaries of, the members of the IMF. Didn't Russia just back their currency with gold again?
There was a brief period of, 2 or 3 weeks where Russia didn't really back the ruble with gold, but the Bank of Russia announced that it would buy gold from Russian miners at a fixed price. This, was not making the ruble directly convertible to gold in violation of the IMF protocol, but it was construed by some people as the implementation of a sort of gold standard. It lasted only a few weeks until the ruble was stabilized, and then the Bank of Russia withdrew its tender for gold at that price. But the bigger point here is, Josh, that gold is a potentially enormous weapon in the currency war that is going on now, really the Cold War, the Ukrainian war. It is a potential weapon by Russia and China against the West and sanctions. Russia could pull the plug on the dollar anytime simply by putting an offer to buy gold substantially above the market price now. China could do the same thing. South Korea could do it. Any country with a substantial foreign exchange surplus could change all the currency values in the world very quickly by offering to buy gold substantially above the current futures market price in New York, around $1,700. That, as Enders told Kissinger in that meeting at the State Department in 1974, that's the kind of thing that would change all currency values and all financial valuations in the world very quickly. Now, they haven't done it yet. We know that they're aware of it. We have on our internet site translations of Chinese government press reports that talk openly about gold market manipulation by the West in order to support the dollar. The WikiLeaks cables that came out a few years ago include these Chinese news reports. And why did WikiLeaks get them? Because WikiLeaks had all these State Department documents that were leaked to them, I think by Bradley Manning. Mm-hmm. And among those documents were cables from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to the State Department in Washington, which translated these Chinese press reports about gold market manipulation by the United States. So we know that China knows all about gold market manipulation because its government press reports have also often contained information about it. And we know that the U.S. government knows that China knows because we have the State Department cables that came from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to the State Department in Washington. So we know that China knows all about gold price suppression policy, and we know that the State Department knows that China knows. in 2004, the deputy chairman of the Bank of Russia, the Russian central bank, Oleg Mizeyskov, gave a speech to the London Bullion Market Association's summer meeting at the Kapinsky Hotel in Moscow. The only words in English he spoke were Gold Antitrust Action Committee. Now, this was quite surprising to us because as of that time, we had no idea that we'd had any contact with anyone in Russia, to the best of our knowledge. I mean, certainly Russians could have been watching us, but we'd had no direct contact with anybody. And then all of a sudden, the deputy chairman of the Bank of Russia mentions GATA in his speech to the London Bullion Market Association in Moscow. We heard about that from indirectly from someone who was at the meeting. So I immediately contacted the London Bullion Market Association. I had been told by our contact that English copies of the speech were distributed at that meeting. Could I get a copy? The LBMA refused to provide me one, very predictably. So I was a little more showing initiative at that time, and I looked up the Bank of Russia's internet site, and I saw they had an English page. And I saw that they were at 12 Neglinaya Street in Moscow, and they had a fax number. So I typed up a letter to Deputy Chairman Mizeyskov and said, hey, I heard you gave this speech to the LBMA in Moscow, and I heard you mentioned my group. The LBMA won't give me a copy of it. Could you send me a copy? And I was a newspaper editor at that time, and I had a Russian-speaking reporter on my staff, was a graduate student in Russia. I told Mizeyskov, listen, you can just give me the original Russian copy because I've got a friend here who can translate it for me. Remarkably, I got a phone message the next day from Mizeyskov saying that he would provide a copy of his speech, but he wanted to control the translation. Apparently, it was that sensitive to him, and he would get a friend of his who was the head of Moscow Narodny Bank in London to do the translation, and his friend from Moscow Narodny Bank would send the text to me. Well, I was very excited about that, but of course, time passed, and it was about a month later I got really a plain manila envelope in my mailbox. No return address other it was embossed Moscow Narodny Bank. So, I think it had British postage on it. I opened it up. There was a translation. And of course, I rushed it onto our internet site. And Mizeyskov said to the London bullion bankers that something like many of you may have heard the group of economists who came together to form the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. Well, that was pretty funny because I'm a college dropout, and our chairman, Bill Murphy, while he went to Cornell, is a former professional football player. so much for the. I mean, look, we have some very brilliant economists, advising us. But anyway, Mizeyskov apparently mistook some of us for economists. But he said, many of you may have heard of the group of economists who came together as the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and they have suggested that the gold price is not being set by the usual factors of supply and demand, and that he didn't want to jump in with a conclusion about that, but he concluded that there were some anomalies in the gold market, and this I think was his polite way of telling the London bullion bankers that the Russian government was now fully on to them, and the gold price suppression policy being undertaken in London. It was not too long afterwards. We had a conference in the Yukon, and a former official of the Soviet Foreign Office came to that meeting, and he thought it was a great conference. He was a great guy, and soon after that, the Russian government announced that it was going to start buying gold on all markets, and it began removing its gold from the Bank of England because it realized that its gold in the custody of the Bank of England was being used to support gold price suppression policy. So we know Russia has known all about gold price suppression policy since at least 2004. We know that the Chinese government has known all about it, at least since the WikiLeaks cables from Beijing to Washington came out. I am sure that they are taking steps to prepare themselves for a revaluation of gold in the future. They could initiate that revaluation at any time if they wanted to. They haven't done it yet. Will they ever do it? I don't know, but I think at least they understand gold is a very powerful defensive weapon in the foreign exchange market.
So then, how much gold do you think is actually like physically left owned within the Federal Reserve that's not either out for being lent out, being used in short selling or in swaps? Like, because you mentioned there was a period where it dropped significantly down below 10,000 tons. Like, did they replenish that? Is there any sort of idea of like how much is actually there?
If you read the secret staff report of the IMF from March 1999, you will see that this question is the most sensitive question in the financial world. That is the question that the world can't be permitted to get an answer to. The official U.S. gold reserve is listed as 8,133 tons of gold. That's not the real issue. The real issue is how much of that is unencumbered and how much of that is encumbered. We know from Fed Governor Warsh's letter to GATA's lawyer that the Fed has gold swap arrangements with foreign banks. We know from ancient memo of the Federal Open Market Committee that the Fed has gold swap arrangements with foreign banks and has made some gold swaps. However, the Fed people now say they have no memory of that. The BIS admits being in the gold swap business. The BIS PowerPoint presentation admits the BIS is in the gold market intervention business. But exactly where the gold is, who it's belonged to, how many claims are on it, that information is more sensitive than the plans for the manufacture and deployment of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, they can only destroy the world. The control of gold, as Henry Kissinger heard in, I guess, April '74 in his office in his conversation with Enders, the control of gold is the control of the world economy. It's the control of all currency values. It's the control of the value of all capital, labor, goods, and currency in the world. Gold is far more sensitive secret than anything. How much real gold is there in the vaults of the central banks? What are their gold liabilities? They're never going to tell you that because then you'll have them perfectly naked before the financial markets, and the financial markets will be able to act accordingly. We do know that the amount of gold the world thinks it owns is probably a fraction. I'm sorry. The amount of gold the world thinks that it owns is backed by just a fraction of real metal. There was a hearing of the CFTC on commodity market regulation. I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. It's on our internet site, and I believe it's in that summary where a gold market expert, Jeff Christian, runs a gold consultancy group and is who includes central banks as his clients. He testified to the CFTC that the leverage in the gold market often approaches 100 to 1. That is, that every ounce of real metal in the market is being traded 100 times at once. The Reserve Bank of India did a report shortly afterwards, estimated the leverage in the gold market 92 to 1. That is that there's 92 more claims of gold on gold than there is gold to back those claims. Now, I don't know. I'm just giving you the indications that are out there. But what would the gold price be if the world knew that only, say, well, at 100 to 1 leverage, that only 1% of its gold claims can be fulfilled? What would the gold price be if people are holding paper gold claims on gold that they don't actually hold in their hand? What would the gold price be if the Reserve Bank of India is right, and that there are 92 claims on gold for every ounce of gold? What would the gold price be if leverage in the gold market was only 10 times? What if only 10% of the world's gold actually exists? It would be multiples of where it is now. And so that's why I think the primary objective of Western central banking, and maybe even Eastern central banking at the moment, is to discourage people from looking into this point too carefully. If you want to let a bullion bank hold your gold for you as a matter of deposit, well, they can give you a piece of paper and you can hold that and you can think it's gold. But if push comes to shove and you want to claim it when everybody else is trying to claim it, it may not be there for you. That's what the central banks have done. They've created a vast imaginary supply of certificate gold, of paper gold, in order to keep the price down. I mean, you look at the gold price. We have the highest inflation in 40 years in the world now, and the gold price has been going down steadily for at least a year. Now, why is that? That's possible only if somebody has created a vast imaginary supply of gold. That's what they've done. That's what the futures markets are about. The futures markets are about creating a vast imaginary supply of gold so that nobody takes physical, and physical gold never reflects its true scarcity in the world. There is a cable from the deputy chief of mission of the U.S. Embassy in London back in 74 or late 73 to the State Department in Washington, saying that he's been surveying London bullion bankers, surveying London bullion bankers about the likely impact of the institution of a gold futures market in the United States, which I think began in December 74. The cable from the London Embassy to the State Department says that the London bullion bankers who were interviewed about the likely impact of the futures market, the forthcoming futures market in gold, thought that with a futures market, the bullion bankers, could inject so much volatility into the gold market that ordinary investors would be scared out of it. And I think that really gave us an idea of what the real reason for the creation of the futures market was. It was to inject volatility into the gold price, or at least the capacity for injecting volatility in the gold price, so much so that regular investors would not want to invest in gold anymore. I mean, again, this is a cable, U.S. government cable, London Embassy, State Department in Washington. You can go read it and decide whether it's a forgery or not.
Yeah, for the sake of the people who are listening that have been very deep into watching the GameStop saga unfold. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the story that's going on, but basically the crux of it is that it's unbelievably similar to what you're laying out here. Is that the idea is that
there's a huge short squeeze potential in gold, just like there was in GameStop.
Yeah, but it's
exactly right.
This idea that the community that have been following this have been looking at this idea that GameStop, that there's like far more shares in circulation than should really exist due to share rehypothecation and illegal naked short selling. all of which theoretically should happen in secret. And the basically when you're buying, it's been like, I've only discovered this, like when you buy shares with a broker, like you're not getting the shares, you're getting a paper certificate, as is the same with a lot of the gold, that says you have the shares, and no one has really any idea how many shares are actually in circulation. But not just in terms of GameStop, across the entire US market, this could be the case. And it's like illustrated by the massive like fails to deliver that have been like documented and well shown by people like Dr. Suzanne Trimbath. And just to for you to be literally repeat, like all you had to do when I was listening to you there was replace the word gold with the word shares, and it's a story I've now heard like 1,000 times, and it doesn't surprise me at all, because if they're doing it in one market, why on earth would it not be happening in the other if they're getting away with it and vice versa? Like if what you're telling me, as I do believe you're citing very legitimate sources, if what you're telling me is true and that they're allowed to get away with rehypothecating the gold, then why would they not do it with the shares? And it's really terrifying that the entire, perhaps all markets are just utterly manipulated. That terrifies me.
Well, if you if you manipulate the price of what's called the risk-free asset, and gold is a risk-free asset if it is, if it's held in your direct possession. If you manipulate the price of the risk-free assets in the world, gold being one of them, the dollar right now being another, you are manipulating the price of everything, because everything draws its price off the price of the risk-free assets. All those prices are derivatives of the price of the risk-free asset. So if you're rigging the gold price, if you're rigging the value of the dollar in the foreign exchange markets, you're rigging every financial valuation in the world.
Yeah,
and that's what Enders told Kissinger at the State Department in April '74. We can't let the Europeans remonetize gold to any extent, because then they'll be able to reprice gold, and in repricing gold, they will reprice every financial value on the planet. And they can't do that. Only we here in the United States can do that.
Yeah. Tell me this, actually. I know Uganda recently think they've discovered 12 trillion in gold deposits. What on earth would that do to the power of that nation?
Well, I don't know. That's it's likely a vast misunderstanding by people in Uganda.
Okay.
Look, people are talking now about mining asteroids for gold.
Oh yeah, I've had people on the show talking about
that. I doubt that there's that. Look, there's gold in Africa, and Africa really is probably the biggest victim of the gold price suppression scheme. Any country begins by exploiting natural resources. Any country, like so many African countries that have substantial gold deposits, those are the countries that are being most exploited by the gold price suppression scheme. But I doubt that there's that much gold available for mining in Uganda. And if there ever is, you can guarantee that the 1st Marine Division will be down there by Monday.
Yeah. The Uganda are suddenly going to develop a wild case of dictator and civil war that requires.
But look at Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a mineral-rich country, potentially agriculturally rich again if they ever let it have a real agricultural economy. And what is it? It's a basket case. It's a rich country insisting on being poor because of its political disorganization and its corruption. But really, most of the countries with substantial gold reserves in the world, South Africa is full of these countries. Asia is full of these countries. They are rich countries insisting on being poor because they either ignore or they play along with the gold price suppression scheme. They're letting the United States and the Western countries underprice their assets for them. A market price for their assets would make them rich.
Well, yeah, and well, yeah, well, Yeah, this has been incredibly educational, and it's going to be a lot for me to process. I'm going to have to do some reading. I got some homework to do now on all of this. I'm going to have to go
Well,
much.
I would just encourage everybody, read the summary and the basics file in our internet site. All the documents there are either printed on the site or they're linked to government internet sites or both. I mean, it's there to decide whether you think it's true or not. I mean, if you doubt it, anyone who doubts it, I would encourage them to go to the source and ask the source, hey, is this genuine or is this a forgery? If you get anybody in official circles to answer you, please tell me, because it'll be a first.
Well, yeah, let them know. I will put the links for the website, all the stuff we've talked about in the description below for people. So yeah, Chris, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, listen, I'm thrilled to find anybody with an internet site that can help us get this out, because it's a long struggle, and this is something that all the money in the world does not want the world to know.
Well, yeah, I'll do my best to get this out there. Like I said, I think people will be fascinated. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, if anybody has got a question, can't find something, I'll be glad to get email from them at cpowell@gata.org.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I'll put that in the description too. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. If you want to leave us a comment, that would be awesome. Please like, share, subscribe, and if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. Until next time, thanks for listening.